The grand hall trembled with the weight of assembled power, but it wasn't the Alpha King's fury or the clash of territorial claims that shattered the foundations of Aldenreach. It was a whisper, soft as snowfall, devastating as an avalanche. One word from a child who had never spoken. One word that turned every eye toward me, the Omega scrubbing floors in the shadows, and made the impossible suddenly terrifyingly real. I've replayed that moment 1,000 times, trying to understand when exactly my world tilted off its axis. Was it when Princess Kaela stood up during the Lunar Council, her small body shaking? Was it when she lifted her finger and pointed across the hall at me? Just me, the Omega servant everyone looked through like glass? Or was it when she opened her mouth and spoke her first word after 5 years of absolute silence? And that word shattered everything I thought I knew about who I was. If you're watching this video, give it a like, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments where you are watching from. Now let's get to the story. I remember the exact moment when everything I understood about my place in the world shattered. It wasn't the Alpha King's rage that did it, though his fury could crack marble and silence battle-hardened warriors. It wasn't the grandeur of the Lunar Council, with its ancient rituals and territorial posturing. Instead, it was a single word, so small and fragile that had the entire court not frozen in absolute stillness, it would have been lost to the echo of stone walls and ceremonial drums. The grand hall of Aldenreach always carried the scent of pine smoke and consecrated oil, a mixture meant to honor both the living and the dead. On ordinary days, the smell brought comfort. But on council days, when alphas from every region gathered to display their power, it became suffocating. I stood where I always did, pressed against the cold marble pillars near the eastern wall, clutching my cleaning cloths like they were shields. Being an Omega in the Alpha King's palace was like being a shadow, visible enough to serve, invisible enough to be dismissed. The hierarchy had existed since the first wolves learned to shift, with alphas commanding from their thrones, betas enforcing their will, and omegas keeping the machinery of power running smoothly. I had accepted this ordering as I accepted the moon's cycles, inevitable, unchangeable, woven into the fabric of existence. The afternoon sun filtered through stained glass windows, painting the hall in shades of amber and crimson. The light made the bloodstone throne, carved from a single piece of obsidian-veined marble, look like it was breathing. Upon it sat King Thane of the Blood Sun, his massive frame draped in ceremonial furs despite the spring warmth. His face bore the scars of 30 years of challenges, each line a testament to battles won and rivals broken. His presence filled the space like a physical force, pressing down on everyone except his daughter. Princess Kaela sat beside him on a smaller chair, her tiny body almost swallowed by silver silk. At 5 years old, she looked like something carved from moonlight, pale hair, translucent skin, eyes the color of winter ice. Those eyes saw everything, understood more than any child should, but her lips had never formed a single sound. Not a cry at birth, not a laugh, not even a whimper when the healers drew her blood and tested her for curses. The court physicians had examined her when she turned 2, bringing instruments of silver and bone, burning sacred herbs, chanting prayers to the old wolf gods. The regional healers came next, each bearing remedies from their territories. Mountain herbs, river stones, forest mushrooms ground into paste. Nothing worked. The whispers started then. Some said her silence was divine punishment for King Thane's pride, for thinking he could rule both Sun and Moon territories without consequence. Others claimed it was her mother's dying curse, Queen Vanya's final act of defiance against a husband who valued conquest over compassion. A few elderly wolves, those who remembered the old ways, said the silence was a gift. A princess who could keep secrets could reshape kingdoms. I understood silence better than most. My mother had given me a silver locket before she died, pressing it into my 6-year-old hands with fingers that trembled from fever. "Liora," she'd whispered, her voice barely audible over the rain hammering our servant's cottage. "Silence is sometimes a shield. But remember, when words are finally spoken, they can break worlds or rebuild them. Guard yours carefully." I wore that locket still, hidden beneath my plain servant's dress, tucked close to my heart. It was the only thing that marked me as anything more than property. The king raised one scarred hand, and the hall fell silent instantly. Two pack leaders from the Western Territories had been arguing over hunting rights, their voices rising to the edge of challenge. The gesture was small but absolute. Power didn't need to shout when it could command with a lifted finger. The disputed forest remains neutral ground, King Thane said, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. Any pack found marking it as exclusive territory will answer to me personally. No one argued. No one ever did, not in open court. Arguments with King Thane happened in shadows, through poisoned words and political maneuvering, never face to face. I shifted slightly, adjusting my grip on the cloths. The movement was barely perceptible, but it was enough. Princess Kaela's head turned, her ice-blue eyes locking with mine across the vast space between throne and pillar. My breath caught. For the past year I had been assigned to her chambers, changing her bedding, selecting her clothes, lighting her morning fires, sitting with her when nightmares made her small body tremble. We had developed a language without words. I could read the slight tightening around her eyes when she was frightened, the barely there softening of her expression when she was content, the particular stillness that meant she was thinking deeply about something. But this was different. There was an urgency in her gaze that made my pulse quicken, a kind of desperate intensity I'd never seen before. The council meeting continued. Reports of strange scents at the borders. Rumors of rogue wolves who acknowledged no pack law. Through it all, Princess Kaela kept glancing at me, her small fingers twisting the silver fabric of her dress into knots. Then came the moment that changed everything. The Alpha from the southern reaches stepped forward, a broad-shouldered man with silver threading his dark beard. Beside him stood his daughter, Mira of the Ironwood Pack, 20 years old and radiating alpha dominance like heat from a forge. She wore the traditional ceremonial dress of a potential royal mate, deep crimson silk embroidered with gold thread, cut to display strength rather than delicacy. "Your Majesty," the Southern Alpha began, his voice smooth as river stones, "my daughter would bring considerable strength to your bloodline. Her Alpha heritage runs pure for 14 generations, and her pack controls the richest hunting grounds south of the Red Moon Mountains." The court murmured appreciatively. Bloodlines were currency in our world. The purer your Alpha heritage, the more power you wielded, which was precisely why Omegas like me were relegated to the pillars and corners, to the spaces between importance. King Thane studied the young woman with clinical detachment, the way one might evaluate livestock. "Your daughter appears strong," he acknowledged, his tone revealing nothing. Mira stepped forward without being invited, her confidence bordering on arrogance. "I would give you heirs worthy of the Bloodstone throne, my king. Strong sons who could defend the realm. Daughters who could forge alliances." The king's expression didn't change, but something shifted in the air, a subtle tension that made the wolves nearest the throne step back unconsciously. That was when Princess Kaela stood up. The movement was so unexpected that several council members gasped. The child never moved during formal proceedings, never drew attention to herself. She was meant to be decorative, a silent reminder of the king's legacy. But she stood, her small body trembling, her face pale as death. Her ice-blue eyes weren't on her father or on the confident alpha woman before the throne. They were on me. Her tiny hand rose, one finger pointing across the vast hall toward the pillar where I stood frozen, my heart hammering against my ribs. And then, impossibly, miraculously, terrifyingly, Princess Kaela spoke. The word was barely more than a breath, but in the absolute silence of the council hall, it rang out like a bell tolling the end of an age. "Mommy." The guards' hands on my arms felt like iron manacles, their grip bruising as they hauled me toward the Bloodstone throne. My feet barely touched the ground. Around me, the court erupted into chaos, voices rising in a cacophony of shock, outrage, and something darker. Fear. Witchcraft. The Omega has bewitched the princess. Unnatural creature. She must have used dark magic. I wanted to protest, to explain that I'd done nothing, taught the child nothing, but my throat had closed around the words. All I could see was Princess Kaela, now held back by her nursemaid, her small hand still reaching toward me, her lips forming that impossible word again and again. Umi, Umi, Umi. King Thane rose from his throne like a storm gathering itself into human form. The ceremonial furs fell away from his shoulders, revealing the battle-scarred muscle beneath. His eyes, those cold blue eyes that had sentenced countless wolves to death, fixed on me with an intensity that made my knees buckle. "Bring her closer," he commanded, his voice cutting through the noise like a blade through silk. The guards dragged me forward until I stood at the base of the throne's dais, close enough to see the veins pulsing in the king's neck, close enough to smell the pine and iron scent that clung to him. I forced myself to look down to show submission, but my heart hammered against my ribs like it was trying to escape. "Look at me, Omega." I had no choice but to obey. Slowly, I raised my eyes to meet his. "What did you do to my daughter?" Each word fell like a stone. "What enchantment did you work? What poison did you whisper into her ears while you tended her chambers?" "Nothing, Your Majesty," I managed, my voice shaking. "I swear by the old gods and the new, I did nothing. I only told her stories. I sang to her sometimes when she couldn't sleep. I never." "Stories." The king descended one step, then another, until he loomed over me. "What kind of stories does an Omega tell a princess? What lies did you fill her head with?" Just old tales, sire. About the moon and stars. About ancient queens and the moon." The king's expression shifted, something dangerous flickering behind his eyes. "You told her stories about the moon." Before I could answer, a figure emerged from the crowd of courtiers. High Priest Aldenreach, the king's spiritual advisor, his ceremonial robes dragging across the marble floor. Behind him came the court physician, a stern-faced woman named Marin who had examined Princess Kaela countless times over the years. "Your Majesty," Aldenreach intoned, his voice carrying the weight of ancient authority, "I must examine the child. If she has truly spoken, we must determine whether this is divine intervention or something darker." King Thane gestured sharply toward his daughter. "Do it." I watched, helpless, as they descended on Kaela. The priest pulled out a vial of sacred oil, marking symbols on her forehead while muttering prayers in the old tongue. The physician pressed her fingers to Kaela's throat, her temples, the pulse points at her wrists. Through it all, the princess remained unnaturally still, her eyes never leaving mine. The examination seemed to take hours, though it couldn't have been more than minutes. Finally, Priest Aldenreach straightened, his face grave. "The child carries the mark," he announced, his words sending a fresh wave of whispers through the court. "The old prophecies speak of a voice that would call forth the wolf beneath the moon, the ancient spirit that guards the boundary between sun and shadow, between the world of flesh and the realm of dreams." "What does that mean?" King Thane demanded. "It means, Your Majesty, that your daughter's first word was not random. It was a calling, a recognition." The priest turned his gaze on me, and I saw something in his expression that made my blood run cold. "The question is, what did this Omega do to trigger such a response?" My mind reeled. Dreams I'd pushed away for years suddenly crashed over me like a wave. Fragmented images of moonlight on water, of a woman's voice singing in a language I shouldn't understand, of silver light pouring from my hands while shadows gathered at the edges of my vision. "I don't know," I whispered. "I don't understand any of this." "Liar!" The king's hand shot out, gripping my chin and forcing my head up. His fingers dug into my skin. "You're hiding something. I can see it in your eyes. Never reveal who you are." The memory hit me like a physical blow. My mother's voice, desperate and urgent, in the moments before fever took her. I'd been so young, barely 6 years old, huddled in the corner of our cottage while rain hammered the roof. "Never reveal who you are, Liora. They killed everyone who bore our name. If they discover the truth, they'll kill you too." "I'm nobody," I said, the words tumbling out. "Just an Omega. Just a servant. I don't know why the princess spoke. I don't know why she called me." That was when it happened. The king's grip shifted, his hand moving from my chin to my throat, and the sudden movement caused my servant's dress to pull tight across my chest. The silver locket I'd worn for 19 years, the one I'd kept hidden beneath layers of fabric and careful positioning, slipped free of its concealment. It swung into the light, spinning on its delicate chain. The effect was instantaneous. King Thane's hand released my throat as if I'd burned him. He stared at the locket, his face draining of color. Around us, the court fell into absolute silence. "Where did you get that?" His voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried more menace than any shout. I looked down at the locket, a simple silver oval tarnished with age, small enough to fit in my palm. But it wasn't the locket itself that had caused this reaction. It was the sigil engraved on its surface. A crescent moon pierced by 3 stars. "It was my mother's," I said, my own voice sounding distant to my ears. "She gave it to me before she died. It's all I have left of her." "Your mother." The king's hand trembled as he reached out, not touching the locket but hovering inches from it, as if afraid it might bite. "What was your mother's name?" "Liora." The name felt strange on my tongue, a word I'd spoken so rarely it had almost lost meaning. "She never told me her family name. She said it was safer that way." Priest Aldenreach moved closer, his eyes widening as he recognized the symbol. "Your Majesty, that mark. It's the seal of the House of Loon. The Moon Dynasty." The words meant nothing to me, but their impact on the court was immediate. Gasps echoed through the hall. Several wolves backed away from me as if I'd suddenly sprouted fangs. Others leaned forward, their expressions hungry, calculating. "Impossible," someone murmured. The Moon Dynasty was destroyed. Every last one of them was hunted down and killed. "Apparently not every last one," Physician Marin said quietly, studying me with new intensity. "Look at her eyes. I never noticed before, but in this light, there's a silver shimmer in the irises. The mark of moon-touched blood." I wanted to deny it, to insist they were wrong, but more memories were flooding back now. My mother's silver-gray eyes that seemed to glow in darkness, the way animals had always trusted her, the strange things that happened when she was angry or afraid. Candles extinguishing themselves. Shadows moving against the light. Dreams that came true. King Thane turned away from me, his massive shoulders rigid. When he spoke, his voice was controlled, but I could hear the rage simmering beneath. The House of Loon was eradicated by my grandfather. They challenged the Sun Kings for supremacy, claiming their blood was purer, their connection to the wolf spirit stronger. They were traitors and heretics. "They were the original royal line," Priest Aldenreach corrected carefully. "Before the Sun Kings rose to power. They were obstacles," the king snarled. "Obstacles that were removed. If even one survived." He spun back to face me. "If you carry their blood, you carry a claim to my throne. Do you understand what that means?" I shook my head frantically. "I claim nothing. I didn't even know. I thought it was just a locket. Just a keepsake from my mother. I don't want. What you want is irrelevant." The king began to pace, his mind clearly racing through implications and possibilities. If word spreads that a Moon Dynasty survivor has been living in my palace, tending my daughter, the political ramifications alone could destabilize the entire kingdom. The eastern reaches still harbor sympathizers. The northern packs never fully accepted Sun rule. They would rally around you like a banner. But I don't want that. My voice rose, desperation clawing at my chest. "I'm nobody. I've always been nobody. I just want to." "To what?" "Continue scrubbing floors." The king laughed, but there was no humor in it. "That option ended the moment my daughter spoke your name." He moved closer again, and this time I saw something different in his expression. Not just rage but something more complicated. Confusion. Perhaps even pain. "My wife," he said slowly, the words seeming to cost him something. "Queen Vanya. She wore a ring with that same symbol. She told me it was a family heirloom, nothing more. I never questioned it. The silence that followed was suffocating. Priest Aldenreach cleared his throat. Your Majesty, Queen Vanya's origins were always somewhat mysterious. She arrived at court as a young woman, sponsored by the Western Reaches, but her parentage was never clearly established. She told me her family died in a plague, King Thane said, his voice hollow. She said she was the last. Perhaps she believed that to be true, the physician suggested gently. Or perhaps she was protecting someone. The king's eyes locked with mine again, and I saw understanding dawning in them. Terrible, unavoidable understanding. What was your mother's full name? He demanded. Not just Liora. Her family name if she ever spoke it. She didn't, I said. She refused. But once, when she was fevered and dying, she kept calling for someone. A name she repeated over and over. I swallowed hard, the memory still painful after all these years. Vanya. She kept crying for Vanya. The king staggered back as if I'd struck him. His hand reached out blindly, gripping the edge of his throne for support. Vanya had a sister, he whispered. She told me once, years ago. A younger sister who was taken during the final purge of the Moon families. She thought the child had been killed. She mourned her for years. His gaze swept over me, taking in my features with new eyes. You have her coloring. The same bone structure. The same. He couldn't finish the sentence. Princess Kaela's voice cut through the tension, high and clear and impossibly knowing. Family. Every head turned toward her. The child stood perfectly still, her ice blue eyes moving between her father and me. Family, she repeated, and this time she smiled. A small, secret smile that looked far too ancient for her 5-year-old face. Outside, thunder rumbled across the sky despite the clear spring afternoon. The sacred fires in their bronze braziers flickered and dimmed, then blazed higher than before, their flames turning from orange to silver-white. Priest Aldenreach fell to his knees. The prophecy, he breathed. By the old gods, the prophecy is beginning. King Thane's expression hardened into something terrible and final. Lock her in the lower chambers. Not the dungeons, the sealed rooms where we keep the royal archives. Post guards at every entrance. No one speaks to her. No one even looks at her until I decide what to do. Your Majesty, I started. Silence. The word cracked like a whip. You will speak when I command it and not before. Take her away. Now. The guards seized me again, and this time I didn't resist. As they dragged me toward the shadowed doorway that led to the depths of the palace, I caught one last glimpse of Princess Kaela. She wasn't looking at her father or the panicked courtiers. She was looking at me, and her lips formed 3 silent words that I somehow understood perfectly. It's not over. Then the doors slammed shut, and I was pulled into darkness, the silver locket burning against my chest like a brand. Proof of a heritage I'd never known, carrying a destiny I'd never wanted, in a world that was beginning to fracture at its very foundations. The sealed chamber smelled of old parchment and forgotten time. I'd spent the night curled on a stone bench, surrounded by shelves of leather-bound volumes and scroll cases marked with wax seals bearing the Sun King's crest. No windows. No natural light. Just the dim glow of a single oil lamp the guards had left burning, casting dancing shadows across ancient maps and genealogies that documented centuries of alpha bloodlines. I hadn't slept. How could I, when every time I closed my eyes, I saw my mother's fevered face, heard her desperate warnings, felt the weight of the locket against my chest like an anchor dragging me toward a truth I'd spent my entire life running from. They killed everyone who bore our name. The Moon Dynasty. The House of Loon. Words that meant nothing to me yesterday now felt like chains wrapping around my throat, pulling tighter with each breath. Footsteps echoed in the corridor beyond the heavy oak door. I sat up quickly, my body tensing as a key scraped in the lock. Dawn light spilled through the opening, pale and gray, but after hours in lamplight, it felt blinding. King Thane stood in the doorway alone. No guards. No advisors. No witnesses. He looked like he'd aged a decade overnight. The ceremonial furs were gone, replaced by a simple linen tunic. His hair, usually bound back in the warrior style, hung loose around his face. But it was his eyes that shocked me, red-rimmed and hollow, stripped of the iron authority that had terrified me in the council hall. This wasn't the Alpha King who commanded armies and crushed rebellions. This was just a man. A grieving man. "Come with me," he said quietly. "We need to talk. Truly talk, without the court's ears pressed to every door." I rose on unsteady legs and followed him through corridors I'd never walked before. Passages reserved for royalty, their walls hung with tapestries depicting great battles and coronations. We climbed a spiral staircase that seemed to go on forever, until finally we emerged into a small chamber at the top of the eastern tower. The room was simple. A desk, 2 chairs, windows on all sides offering views of Aldenreach stretching to the horizon, the city still sleeping, morning mist clinging to the valleys beyond. But what drew my attention was the portrait hanging above the desk. Queen Vanya. I'd seen her face before in the formal paintings that decorated the Great Hall, but those had been stiff and ceremonial, showing her in full royal regalia, her expression distant and regal. This was different. This was intimate. She sat in a garden, sunlight caught in her silver blonde hair, her smile soft and genuine, and around her neck, clearly visible, hung a pendant bearing the crescent moon and 3 stars. "This was her private study," King Thane said, his voice rough. "I haven't been able to come here since she died. But last night I couldn't stop thinking about." He trailed off, moving to the window. Please." I lowered myself into one of the chairs, my hands gripping the armrests. The king remained standing, his back to me, looking out over his kingdom. "She used to stand right here," he said. "Every morning before dawn. She said she needed to watch the sun rise, needed to remember that light always follows darkness." A bitter laugh escaped him. I thought she was being poetic. I never understood she was reminding herself of something else entirely. Silence stretched between us, heavy with unspoken questions. Finally he turned. "Tell me about your mother. Everything you remember." So I did. The words came haltingly at first, then faster, like a dam breaking. I told him about the cottage on the edge of the servants' quarters, about my mother's gentle hands and the lullabies she sang in a language that wasn't quite the common tongue, about the way she'd wake screaming from nightmares, calling names I didn't recognize, about the fever that took her when I was 6, and the desperate, broken things she'd whispered in those final hours. "She kept saying she'd failed," I said, my voice cracking. "That she'd promised to protect something, someone, and she'd failed. She made me swear never to reveal who I was, never to let anyone see the locket, never to trust the Sun Kings." I looked up at him, tears blurring my vision. I didn't even know what that meant. I thought she was just delirious. King Thane had moved to the desk, his hands gripping its edge so tightly his knuckles had gone white. "What else? What else did she say?" "She kept crying for Vanya. Over and over. 'Sorry, Vanya. I couldn't find you. They told me you were dead, but I never believed it. I'm so sorry.' The memory still ached after all these years. I asked her who Vanya was, but she just closed her eyes and that was the last thing she said to me." The king's shoulders shook. When he spoke, his voice was barely audible. "Vanya told me about her sister exactly once. It was the night Kaela was born, when the physicians said she might not survive the birth. She was terrified, feverish, and she grabbed my hand and made me promise something." He moved to a locked drawer in the desk, producing a small wooden box. Inside, nestled in velvet, was a ring, simple silver, bearing the same crescent moon and 3 stars as my locket. "She made me swear that if she died, I would search for a girl named Liora, a girl who would be about 12 years old by then, who might be living as a servant somewhere in the kingdom. She said Liora was her baby sister, stolen during the night the Moon Dynasty fell." His fingers trembled as he lifted the ring. "Vanya's family was attacked when she was 17. Her parents were killed, her brothers executed. She escaped because she was visiting the western reaches, forming an alliance marriage that never happened. By the time she returned, her entire house was ash. But she thought her sister survived, I whispered. She knew her sister survived. She'd received one message years after the purge, a single line delivered by a traveling merchant. The little moon is hidden among the shadows. Do not look for her, or they will find her too. King Thane set the ring down carefully. Vanya spent years searching quietly, carefully, never letting anyone know what she was doing. She checked the records of every servant family, every orphanage, every Omega household in the kingdom. But she never found her. Because my mother changed her name, I said, understanding dawning. Because she was hiding. And because I stopped her from searching. The king's face twisted with anguish. After Kaela was born, Vanya became obsessed with finding Liora. She would disappear for days, following leads that went nowhere. I thought she was losing her mind with grief. The baby wouldn't speak, wouldn't cry, and Vanya convinced herself it was because we hadn't reunited the bloodlines. He looked at me directly. There was a prophecy, you see. An old Moon Dynasty prophecy that Vanya told me about when she was dying. What prophecy? He moved to a shelf and pulled down a thin volume bound in midnight blue leather. Opening it to a marked page, he read aloud. When the daughter of sun walks in silence, and the lost moon rises from shadow, when blood calls to blood across the divide, the child who could not speak will name the forgotten, and in that naming the old balance shall wake. Sun and moon, united at last, shall heal the wounds torn by pride and fear. The words hung in the air like a living thing. Outside, birds had begun their morning songs, but they sounded distant, muffled, as if the tower existed in a separate world. She believed Kaela's silence was the prophecy beginning, King Thane continued. She believed that finding Liora, finding you, was the key to everything. But I forbade her from continuing the search. I told her the prophecy was superstition, that she needed to focus on the child we had rather than chasing ghosts. His voice broke. 2 weeks later she died. Infection from the birth that never fully healed. And her last words to me were, "Promise you'll find my sister. Promise you'll protect her daughter. The balance requires it." "I'm Liona's daughter," I said, though we both already knew. "You're Vanya's niece. Which makes you royal blood. Which makes you..." He couldn't finish. "Kaela's cousin," I completed. "That's why she called me." She knew. Somehow she knew. The king nodded slowly. "Blood calls to blood. It's not just a saying among our kind, it's truth. The wolf spirit recognizes its own, especially when the bloodlines are as ancient as yours." He sank into the chair opposite me, suddenly looking every one of his 47 years. "My daughter didn't call you mommy because you taught her stories or sang her lullabies. She called you that because her wolf spirit recognized its kin, the closest thing to her mother's blood still living." The realization hit me like a physical force. All those nights sitting with Kaela, feeling an inexplicable pull toward the silent child, the way her presence calmed something restless inside me. It hadn't been maternal instinct or servant's duty. It had been blood recognition. Family calling to family across the barrier of ignorance and fear. "What happens now?" "Yes. You said if the court learns of this, I'll be branded a traitor." "Worse than that." King Thane ran his hands through his hair. "There are wolves in my own council who would see you dead simply for existing. The Moon Dynasty had supporters, wolves who never accepted sun rule, who've been waiting for any excuse to challenge my authority. If they discover a legitimate moon heir has been living under my roof..." He shook his head. "The kingdom would tear itself apart." "Then kill me," I said, surprised by how steady my voice remained. "Isn't that the simplest solution? I didn't ask for this bloodline. I don't want power or thrones or..." "I can't kill you." The words exploded from him, raw and desperate. "Don't you understand? You're the only living connection to my wife. You're Vanya's sister's child. You're Kaela's family, Real family, blood family. Everything Vanya died hoping to find. He stood abruptly, pacing to the window. And even if I could bring myself to order your execution, I don't think I'd survive it. Kaela has already claimed you. If I took you from her now. He didn't need to finish. We both knew what happened to wolves who betrayed their own blood. The wolf spirit itself would turn against them, driving them mad with guilt and rage. So what do we do? Yes. I don't know. For the first time since I'd met him, the Alpha King sounded completely lost. Could send you away. Hide you in some distant territory, give you a new identity. But the prophecy. That's when the first tremor hit. It started as a low vibration, barely perceptible, like distant thunder rolling through the earth itself. The books on the shelves rattled. The windows hummed in their frames. King Thane's head snapped up, his wolf instincts flaring. What? A second tremor, stronger this time. The portrait of Queen Vanya swung on its hook. Somewhere in the palace below, I heard glass shattering. Then came the howls. Not the normal wolf howls that echoed through Aldenreach during pack gatherings. These were different, ancient, wild, carrying harmonics that made my bones ache and my teeth rattle. They came from everywhere and nowhere, as if the very stones of the kingdom were crying out. The king rushed to the eastern window, and I joined him. In the distance, beyond the city walls, lights were appearing. Not torches or lanterns, but something else. Cold, silver-white flames that danced without consuming, that moved against the wind. By the old gods, King Thane whispered. The moon fires. They haven't been seen since the night of the Great Purge, when my grandfather destroyed the House of Loon. More howls rose closer now. The palace guards were shouting, running to their posts. Bells began to toll, the warning bells that signaled attack. But this wasn't a normal attack. Even I could sense that. This was something older, something that had been sleeping for decades and was now waking up. It's Kaela, I said suddenly, certainty flooding through me. When she spoke, when she called out to me, she didn't just break her own silence. She broke something bigger. King Thane turned to me, his face pale. The prophecy said, "The child who could not speak will name the forgotten, and in that naming, the old balance shall wake." Vanya warned me about this. She said if the prophecy began without preparation, without the bloodlines properly united, the magic itself would respond chaotically. The old powers wouldn't know friend from foe, they would simply erupt. Another tremor shook the tower, strong enough to crack the stone beneath our feet. The silver flames on the horizon grew brighter, spreading like wildfire through the morning mist. A guard burst through the door, wild-eyed and breathless. "Your Majesty, the perimeter is under assault. But it's not enemy wolves, it's... We don't know what they are. Shadows that move like living things. Ancient beasts that haven't been seen in centuries. And there's something else." He swallowed hard. "The princess. She's standing at her window, and she's glowing. Silver light just like in the old stories. The nursemaids are terrified to approach her." King Thane grabbed his sword from where it hung beside the desk. "Lock down the inner palace. Get every non-combatant to the secure chambers. And bring my daughter to..." "No," I interrupted. Everyone stared at me, the Omega who had no right to contradict a king's command. But the certainty burning in my chest was too strong to ignore. Kaela is calling them. The magic, the old powers, they're responding to her because she's the bridge. Sun and Moon blood united in one child. You can't lock her away. You have to bring her to me. "Are you insane?" the guard sputtered. "This Omega has no authority to..." "She has more authority than you know," King Thane said quietly. His eyes locked with mine, and in them I saw the decision being made in real time. Trust or execution, family or politics, the old world or something new and terrifying. He turned to the guard. "Bring Princess Kaela here. Carefully. And tell no one where you're taking her. Not even the high priest. This is a direct order from your king." As the guard rushed away, More howls rose from the darkness beyond the city walls. The silver flames crept closer, and I could swear I heard voices in them. Ancient voices, singing in the language my mother had used in her lullabies. King Thane moved to stand beside me at the window, watching his kingdom begin to burn with cold fire. "If we survive this," he said softly, "everything changes. The hierarchy, the traditions, the careful balance of power I've spent 30 years maintaining, all of it will crumble." "Maybe it needs to," I replied, thinking of every Omega who'd been dismissed, every servant who'd been made invisible, every voice that had been silenced in service to a system built on the ashes of genocide. He glanced at me, something like respect flickering in his expression. "You sound like Vanya." She used to say the same thing. Outside, the howls grew louder, and somewhere in the chaos, I heard a child's voice, clear and bright and impossible, calling my name across the distance. The storm had only just begun. The silver flames reached the outer walls just as the guard returned with Princess Kaela. The child walked calmly between two terrified nursemaids, her small feet bare against the cold stone floor. She wore only her nightgown, but she didn't seem to notice the chill. Her ice-blue eyes had taken on a luminescence I'd never seen before, not quite glowing, but reflecting light that wasn't there, as if she carried her own private moon within her skull. "Liora," she said clearly, pulling free of the nursemaids and running toward me. Her voice was stronger than it had been in the council hall, each syllable pronounced with careful precision, as if she were tasting words for the first time and finding them delicious. I caught her in my arms, and the moment we touched, something shifted inside me. A warmth spread through my chest, radiating outward from the locket until my entire body hummed with energy I didn't understand. Images flashed behind my eyes. Not memories, but something older. Inherited knowledge passed down through blood and bone. This is what it means to be moon-touched. This is what they tried to destroy. "Your Majesty!" A different guard burst through the door, this one bleeding from a gash across his forehead. "The eastern gate has fallen. They're in the lower courtyards." King Thane grabbed the man's shoulder. Who's attacking us?" "I don't, they're not natural, sire." "Wolves, yes, but wrong. Twisted. Their eyes are empty. Their movements coordinated like they're being controlled. And there's a man leading them, dressed in the old priest's robes, the kind from before the Great Purge." "Silric," King Thane breathed, his face going pale. "He's supposed to be dead. I executed him myself 10 years ago for practicing forbidden blood magic." "Apparently he didn't stay dead," the guard said, swaying on his feet. "He's calling for the princess. Says she belongs to the moon. Not the sun, says her voice will restore the old balance, and he's the rightful keeper of that power." My arms tightened around Kaela. The child remained perfectly calm, her small hand reaching up to touch my cheek. "Don't be afraid," she whispered. "You remember. Deep down. You remember what to do." But I didn't remember. I didn't know anything except terror and the overwhelming instinct to protect this child, this piece of my family I'd never known I had. Another explosion shook the tower. The windows cracked, spider web patterns spreading across the glass. Below, I could hear screaming, the clash of steel, and beneath it all, that terrible coordinated howling that made my skin crawl. "We need to move," King Thane commanded. "The inner sanctum has defenses That's when the real attack began. The eastern wall of the tower simply disintegrated. Not from battering rams or explosives, but from something that looked like concentrated shadow, dark tendrils that ate through stone like acid through flesh. Cold wind rushed in, carrying the scent of char and something else, the copper-sweet smell of corrupted magic. Through the gap stepped a figure that should have been impossible. Silric had been a man once. The tales said he'd been the high priest of the Moon Dynasty, devoted to preserving the old ways. But what stood before us now was barely human. His body was wrapped in ceremonial robes that seemed to be made of living darkness, constantly shifting and writhing. His face was gaunt, skin stretched too tight over bone, and his eyes, His eyes were empty white orbs that leaked silver tears down his hollow cheeks. "There she is," he said, his voice echoing strangely, as if multiple people were speaking through his mouth. "The voice of balance. The child who will restore what was stolen." King Thane moved to stand between us and the corrupted priest, his sword drawn. "You're dead, Silric. I watched you burn." "Death is just another form of service," Silric replied, taking a step forward. The stone beneath his feet cracked and blackened. "I died, yes. But the old magic wouldn't let me rest. Not while the prophecy remained unfulfilled. Not while the Moon Dynasty's power lay dormant, waiting for the right key to unlock it." His empty gaze fixed on Kaela. And then she spoke. After 5 years of silence, the daughter of both bloodlines finally spoke, and the doors between worlds cracked open. "She's a child," I said, finding my voice despite the terror clawing at my throat. "Whatever you think she is, she's just a child." "She's the bridge," Silric corrected. "Sun and moon united in one fragile vessel. Her blood sings with power that hasn't been seen since the first shifting. And her voice." He smiled, revealing teeth that had been filed to points. "Her voice can command the ancient magics, can bend reality itself if properly directed. With her I can restore the Moon Dynasty. With her, I can remake the world into what it was always meant to be." "You mean you can control that power for yourself?" King Thane snarled. "This isn't about restoration, it's about domination." "What's the difference?" Silric's hands began to glow with that same sickly silver light. "Give her to me, and I'll let the rest of you live. Resist, and I'll tear this palace apart stone by stone." Kaela's hand tightened in mine. She wasn't looking at Silric or her father. She was looking at me, and in her eyes I saw something that made my breath catch. Recognition, trust, certainty. "Run," she whispered. "Down, deep down, where the moon sleeps." Before I could ask what she meant, power exploded through the room. Silric struck first, bolts of corrupted magic that turned the air black and made the temperature plummet. King Thane met him blade to shadow, his sword glowing with the Sun King's blessing, inherited power against stolen magic. But I barely saw the battle, because Kaela was pulling me backward, toward the shattered eastern wall, and my body was moving before my mind could catch up. We stepped through the gap onto a narrow ledge, wind whipping around us, and below was chaos. The palace grounds had become a battlefield. Corrupted wolves, their fur matted with shadow, their eyes empty white orbs like Silric's, tore through the defenders. Silver flames danced across the courtyards, and everywhere I looked, reality seemed to be fraying at the edges. "Jump," Kaela said calmly. "What?" "We're 5 stories up." "Trust," she insisted. "Trust blood. Trust moon. Trust you." Then she stepped off the ledge and fell. I didn't think. Couldn't think. My body moved on instinct. The same instinct that had made my mother run, that had kept our bloodline alive through decades of genocide. I jumped after her. We should have died. Should have shattered against the courtyard stones like dropped pottery. Instead, silver light erupted around us, slowing our fall until we landed as gently as leaves on water. The moment my feet touched ground, knowledge flooded my mind. Not memories exactly, but something deeper. Ancestral wisdom. The collected experience of every moon-touched woman who'd come before me. Tunnels. The sacred path. The places where moon magic runs through stone like rivers through earth. "This way," I heard myself say, though I didn't know how I knew. I grabbed Kaela's hand and ran, not toward safety but deeper into the palace, into sections I'd never entered, following a pull I'd never felt before. Behind us, I heard King Thane roar in pain and fury. Heard Silric's terrible laughter. Heard the palace beginning to crack and crumble under the weight of conflicting magics. We ran through corridors that twisted impossibly, down staircases that seemed to appear just when we needed them. The locket burned against my chest, growing hotter with each step, and the markings on the walls, markings I'd never noticed before, began to glow silver under my gaze. Moon runes. ancient symbols that predated the Sun Kings, predated even the written language. They showed me the way like breadcrumbs through a dark forest. We passed servants fleeing in the opposite direction, guards rushing toward the battle, nobles barricading themselves in their chambers. None of them saw us. It was as if we'd slipped into a different version of the palace, one that existed alongside the physical structure but separate from it. "Where are we going?" I gasped, though part of me already knew. "Home," Kaela replied. "Where it started. Where it has to end." We descended deeper than I'd known the palace went. Past the wine cellars and storage vaults. Past the dungeons where prisoners waited for the king's justice. Down into sections of worked stone so old the walls had gone smooth with age. Then the stairs ended and we stood before a door. It was carved from a single piece of moonstone. Impossible, because moonstone didn't come in pieces this large, didn't glow with its own internal light. Symbols covered its surface, the same crescent moon and 3 stars repeated in endless variations. And at its center was a handprint, sized for a child. "Open it," Kaela said, releasing my hand. "I don't know how." "You do. You've always known. You just forgot." She was right. My hand moved to the locket, springing it open. Inside, pressed against the space where my mother's portrait should have been, was a tiny piece of that same moonstone. I removed it carefully and pressed it against the door's center. Light exploded outward, pure and clean and so bright I had to close my eyes against it. When I opened them again, the door stood open, revealing a chamber beyond. It was impossible. We were deep underground, yet the chamber was filled with moonlight, silver and cool and absolutely real. The walls were covered in more of those ancient carvings, and at the room's center stood an altar of white stone. But what drew my attention was the ceiling. It wasn't stone. It was open to the sky, but not our sky. This was a night sky I'd never seen, with 3 moons hanging in perfect alignment, stars arranged in patterns that hurt to look at because they were too perfect, too mathematical, too right. "The heart of the Moon Dynasty," a voice said behind us. I spun around. Silric stood in the doorway, his robes torn and smoking dark blood, or something like blood, dripping from a wound in his side. But he was smiling his terrible smile. "I wondered if it still existed," he continued, stepping into the chamber. "The place where the first moon queens communed with the wolf spirit itself. Where they learned to speak to magic in its purest form." His empty eyes fixed on Kaela. "Perfect. The ritual will be even more powerful here." "You can't have her," I said, positioning myself between him and the child. My hands were shaking, but that strange warmth from the locket was spreading through my body, filling me with something that felt like courage and terror mixed together. "Can't I?" Silric raised his hands, and the shadows around him deepened, solidified. "You're just an Omega who's only just learned what she is. I've been studying the old magics for decades. I've died and returned. I've sacrificed everything to restore the Moon Dynasty's power. What can you possibly do to stop me?" I didn't have an answer. Didn't have training or knowledge or anything except the desperate need to protect Kaela and the strange certainty that this chamber, this place, recognized me as something more than a servant. The carvings on the walls began to glow brighter, responding to my fear, to my determination. The 3 moons in the impossible sky above pulsed in rhythm with my heartbeat. Kaela stepped forward, placing her small hand in mine. When she spoke, her voice carried harmonics that made the entire chamber ring like a bell. "You can't have me," she said, echoing my words. "Because I don't belong to you. I don't belong to anyone. I belong to the balance. And she squeezed my hand, is my blood, my family, my moon." Silric's expression twisted with rage. "Then you'll both serve my purpose." He struck, and the world exploded into silver fire and shadow. And in that moment, as corrupted magic filled the air and threatened to tear us apart, something inside me finally, completely awakened. My mother's voice, echoing across the years. "Protect the air of silence." My blood, singing with power it had carried in secret for decades. The locket against my chest, burning like a star being born. I didn't know what I was doing. Didn't know the words I spoke or the gestures my hands made. But the chamber knew. The ancient magic knew. And it rose to meet me like greeting an old friend who'd been gone too long. The carvings blazed with light so bright the shadows couldn't exist. The 3 moons above aligned perfectly, and their combined light poured down like liquid silver. Silric screamed, in rage or agony or both, as the pure moon magic struck him like a physical blow. And Kaela's voice rose above it all, speaking words in the ancient tongue, words that made reality bend and shift and remember what it had been before corruption, before genocide, before fear had twisted magic into a weapon. The battle for the Moon Dynasty's soul had begun. And somehow, impossibly, I was at its center. The silver light didn't just fill the chamber. It was the chamber, pulsing through stone and air and the space between heartbeats. I could feel it moving through my veins like liquid starlight, burning away fear and uncertainty, leaving only crystalline clarity. Kaela's hand remained locked in mine, her small fingers surprisingly strong. She wasn't trembling, wasn't crying. Instead, she stood perfectly still, her ice-blue eyes reflecting the 3 moons above as if they lived inside her. "I've been here before," she said, her voice carrying that strange harmonic quality that made the air vibrate. "In dreams. Every night since I was born. Mama used to bring me here." She looked up at me. "Not Mama who died. Mama who came before. The first Mama. The one who built this place. The first Moon Queen," I whispered, understanding flooding through me. The ancestral memories were stronger now, clearer. I could almost see her, a woman with silver hair and eyes like mirrors, who'd first learned to speak to the wolf spirit, who'd created this sacred space where magic and reality touched. Silric's laughter cut through the moment like a blade. "Touching. The child has inherited memories. But memories won't save you from what I've become." He stepped fully into the chamber, and the wrongness of him became even more apparent in the pure moonlight. His corrupted magic writhed and twisted, trying to maintain form against the pressure of ancient power. Where the silver light touched him, his flesh smoked and blistered, but he didn't seem to notice or care. "Do you know how long I've searched for this place?" he asked, his voice shifting between registers, sometimes his own, sometimes layered with other voices, the ghosts of those he'd consumed to sustain his unnatural existence. 30 years. 30 years since the night of purging, when the Sun Kings slaughtered my entire order. I was the youngest priest, barely 20, and I watched them burn the archives, destroy the sacred texts, execute every keeper of the old ways. He moved closer to the altar, and I noticed the carvings nearest him were beginning to darken, their silver light dimming under his influence. I fled into the wilderness, studied forbidden magics, made pacts with things that should have remained sleeping, all to preserve what was being destroyed, all to ensure the Moon Dynasty's power wouldn't die with its queens. His empty eyes fixed on Kaela with terrible hunger. And then I heard the prophecy, whispered by dying spirits, confirmed by visions granted through blood sacrifice. A child would be born carrying both bloodlines, sun and moon united in one vessel. And when that child spoke, the world would remember what it had forgotten. "You want to control that memory," I said, pulling Kaela slightly behind me. "You want to shape it into your own twisted vision. I want to restore the natural order." Silric's voice rose to a shriek that made the chamber shudder. "The Sun Kings rule through dominance and fear. The Moon Dynasty ruled through balance and wisdom. Which world would you prefer, little Omega? The one where you scrub floors, or the one where your blood grants you the respect you deserve?" It was a tempting vision. I'd be lying if I said part of me didn't yearn for it. A world where Omegas weren't invisible, where hierarchy wasn't determined by the accident of birth. But looking at Silric, at what his quest for that world had turned him into, I knew his version would be just as corrupt, just as cruel, just dominance wearing a different crown. "The prophecy isn't about replacing one tyranny with another," I said. "It's about balance, about healing what was broken." "Then let's see what the prophecy actually says, shall we?" Kaela's voice was clear and strong, more mature than any 5-year-old should be. She pulled her hand from mine and walked to the altar. I started to follow, but she held up one small palm. Wait. This part is mine. My mother's locket, our family's locket, hung from my neck, but I noticed Kaela had something too. A small chain I'd never seen before, tucked beneath her nightgown. She pulled it free, revealing a pendant I recognized immediately. Queen Vanya's ring, the one King Thane had shown me, now strung on a silver chain. Papa put it on me the night Mama died, Kaela explained, approaching the altar. Said it would keep her close to my heart. But it's more than that, isn't it? She looked at me with ancient eyes. It's the other half. Understanding struck like lightning. I removed my locket, the clasp opening easily now, revealing the moonstone fragment inside. Kaela did the same with her pendant, and inside the ring's setting was another piece of moonstone, perfectly shaped to fit with mine. Together, Kaela said. I joined her at the altar, and we placed both pieces of moonstone into a circular depression carved into the white stone surface. They fit together perfectly, forming a complete disk that began to glow with increasing intensity. The 3 moons above aligned even more precisely, and their light concentrated into a single beam that struck the completed moonstone disk. The altar cracked open, not breaking but unfolding like a flower, revealing a cavity within. Inside lay a scroll so old it should have crumbled to dust, but the moonlight preserved it, kept it pristine. Kaela reached for it, but Silric lunged forward. That's mine. I've earned the right. No. The word came from Kaela, but it wasn't just a word. It was a command that carried the weight of every moon queen who'd ever lived, every keeper of balance who'd fought to preserve rather than dominate. The air itself fractured. The single syllable, no, rippled outward like a stone dropped in still water, but these ripples were made of pure sound, pure intention, pure power. They struck Silric mid-lunge, and he froze, suspended in mid-air. His face contorted in rage and disbelief. The runes covering the chamber's walls blazed so bright I had to shield my eyes. The 3 moons above pulsed in perfect synchronization with Kaela's heartbeat. I could feel it through the connection we shared, blood calling to blood. I said no, Kaela repeated, and this time her voice made the stones sing. You don't get to take this. You don't get to twist it. You don't get to turn balance into domination just because you suffered. Everyone suffered. Everyone lost something in the wars. But you, her small hand pointed at him steady as stone, you chose to become the same thing you claimed to hate. Silric struggled against the invisible bonds holding him, his corrupted magic flaring and writhing. You're a child. You don't understand what was lost, what was stolen, what must be. I understand better than you, Kaela interrupted. I've been silent for 5 years. 5 years of listening, watching, learning. I heard every whisper in the court, saw every cruelty, felt every imbalance. Her eyes shifted to me. And I waited, because I knew she would come. I knew my moon would rise from shadow when the time was right. My chest tightened with emotion I couldn't name. Pride, love, recognition. This child, this extraordinary, impossible child, had been waiting for me, for family, for the missing piece that would make the prophecy whole. Read it, Kaela said, gesturing to the scroll. Read what was written before either dynasty knew what they would become. My hands trembled as I lifted the ancient parchment. The words were written in the old tongue, but I could read them. Another gift of awakened blood, inherited knowledge rising to the surface. I read aloud. In the age when pride divides what love united. When sun scorns moon and moon mourns sun. When silence falls upon the bridge between. Know this truth. Balance is not the absence of power, but the harmony of opposites. The daughter of Sun who walks in silence is not cursed but blessed, for she carries both lights within her blood. When the lost moon rises from shadow, when blood calls to blood across the divide, when the silent child speaks at last, the world will remember. Strength without compassion is tyranny. Compassion without strength is surrender. Only together, sun and moon. Alpha and Omega. Voice and silence. Can the balance be restored? The child who could not speak will name the forgotten. And in that naming, the old wounds shall close. The old magic shall wake. And the world shall breathe anew. But beware. Those who seek to control this power, who would bend it to dominance rather than harmony, shall be consumed by their own hunger, burned by the very light they sought to steal. The words hung in the air like a living thing, and I understood. Finally, completely understood. This wasn't about restoring the Moon Dynasty or maintaining Sun rule. It was about ending the division altogether. About creating something new from the ashes of both. Silric understood too. I saw it in his face. The terrible realization that he'd spent decades pursuing a vision that was never meant to be his. That the prophecy wasn't a weapon to wield but a healing to accept. And he chose rage. If I can't control it, he snarled, then no one will. His corrupted magic exploded outward, no longer trying to capture or control, but simply to destroy. Shadow and twisted light filled the chamber, attacking everything. The altar, the walls, the 3 moons above. Attacking us. But I was ready. The ancestral memories weren't just knowledge anymore. They were instinct. I raised my hands, and silver light poured from my palms, meeting Silric's darkness with the pure magic of the Moon Queens. Not to attack but to shield. To protect. The locket burned white-hot against my chest, and I felt the presence of every woman who'd carried it before me. My mother, Liora. Her sister, Queen Vanya. Back and back through generations of moon-touched women who'd preserved this bloodline through war and genocide and the slow erosion of memory. Kaela! I shouted over the roar of conflicting magics. The prophecy, finish it. The child stood at the altar's center, untouched by the chaos surrounding her, haloed in light that came from within rather than above. She placed both hands on the reunited moonstone disk, and when she spoke, her voice carried harmonics that existed beyond human hearing, frequencies that resonated with the wolf spirit itself. I am Kaela, daughter of Thane and Vanya, carrier of Sun and Moon, she said, and the words made reality tremble. I am the bridge between what was and what will be. And I say, her voice rose, young and clear and absolutely certain. Enough. The word detonated like a star. Light exploded from the altar, from Kaela, from the reunited moonstone. But this wasn't just moonlight or sunlight. It was both woven together into something new. Something that didn't erase either source but harmonized them. I channeled that power, shaped it with the knowledge rising from my blood, and sent it directly at Silric. Not to attack him, but to show him what he'd refused to see. To force him to look at the truth he'd been running from for 30 years. He screamed as the light struck him, not in pain but in understanding. In the terrible, unavoidable recognition that he'd become the very thing he'd fought against. That his quest to restore balance had created the deepest imbalance of all. The corrupted magic he'd spent decades cultivating turned against him, drawn to the purity of the combined light like a moth to flame. It consumed him from the inside out, burning away the stolen years, the forbidden power, the unnatural extension of a life that should have ended long ago. No, he whispered, but this time the word carried only sorrow. No, I was supposed to save them. I was supposed to. You were supposed to let go, I said softly. You were supposed to trust that balance doesn't need to be forced. That healing happens when we stop trying to control it. Silric's form began to dissolve, the shadows releasing their grip, revealing the man he'd been beneath all that corruption. For just a moment I saw him, young, idealistic, heartbroken by loss. The priest who'd loved his order, who'd genuinely believed in the Moon Dynasty's wisdom. Tell them, he gasped, his voice fading. Tell them I tried. Tell them I'm sorry I forgot that balance includes mercy. Then he was gone. Not destroyed but released. The corrupted magic dissipated like morning mist, and where he'd stood, only a small pile of ash remained. Ash and a single moonstone fragment, cracked but still faintly glowing. The chamber fell silent except for Kaela's breathing and my own hammering heart. Then the walls began to crack. Not from Silric's final attack, but from something else. The combined power we'd released, Sun and Moon united, was too much for even this ancient place to contain. The 3 moons above flickered and faded. The carvings on the walls flared one last time, then went dark. "We have to go," I said, grabbing Kaela's hand. "The chamber is collapsing." But Kaela didn't move. She was staring at the altar, at the reunited moonstone disk that was now glowing with steady, sustained light. "It's not collapsing," she said with that eerie certainty. "It's opening." And she was right. The cracks spreading through the walls weren't breaking the chamber apart. They were revealing light beneath. White light, pure and clean, that poured through every fracture like the palace itself was becoming transparent. The floor beneath our feet began to glow, and I realized we were standing on one massive rune, a pattern so large we couldn't see its shape from ground level. But from above, from the perspective of those 3 moons that were now fading back into wherever they'd come from, it would have been clear. A sun and moon overlapping, unified, whole. The light grew brighter, consuming everything. The altar, the walls, Kaela and me, and the entire impossible chamber. I should have been afraid, but all I felt was peace. Certainty. The bone-deep knowledge that this was what was supposed to happen. This was what the prophecy had always meant. The world went white. And in that whiteness I heard voices. Not Silric's tortured whispers or the corrupted howling from above. These were different voices, ancient and young, male and female, alpha and omega. Every wolf who'd ever lived, every keeper of balance, every soul who'd chosen harmony over dominance. They were singing. A song that had no words but infinite meaning. A song that rewrote reality from the ground up. Healing wounds that had festered for generations, bridging divides that had seemed permanent as stone. I felt Kaela's hand in mine, small and warm and absolutely real. And I felt something else, the presence of others. My mother, Liora, no longer fevered and dying but whole and proud. Queen Vanya, her eyes full of joy at seeing the niece she'd searched for and the daughter who'd finally spoken. Behind them countless others. The moon queens who'd ruled with wisdom. The sun kings who'd led with strength before pride corrupted them. All of them together, witnessing what we'd done, what we'd become. "Thank you," they seemed to say. "Thank you for remembering. Thank you for choosing balance over vengeance, healing over control. Thank you for being brave enough to speak when silence was safer, to rise when staying hidden was easier. Thank you for breaking the world so it could be rebuilt properly." The white light began to fade, and I felt solid ground beneath my feet again. But it wasn't the underground chamber anymore. We were somewhere else entirely. I woke to the sound of water. Not the crash of waves or the roar of rapids, but the gentle murmur of a river moving peacefully over smooth stones. The sound was so ordinary, so mundane after everything we'd experienced, that for a moment I thought I'd dreamed it all. The council hall. Prophecy. The chamber beneath the earth. Silric's final dissolution into ash and light. But then I felt the weight of Kaela's small body curled against mine. Her breath warm and steady against my shoulder, and I knew it had all been terrifyingly, impossibly real. I opened my eyes to dawn. We lay on a grassy bank beside the Silver Thread River, the waterway that marked the eastern boundary of Aldenreach's capital. Behind us, rising against the pale morning sky, stood the palace, or what remained of it. The eastern tower where I'd first spoken with King Thane was gone, collapsed into rubble. Sections of the outer walls had crumbled. Smoke still rose from the courtyards, dark columns against the lightning sky. But it was standing. Damaged, scarred, but still standing. And the silver flames that had threatened to consume everything were gone, replaced by the normal orange glow of regular fires being brought under control. I sat up carefully, trying not to wake Kaela. My servant's dress was torn and filthy, decorated with ash and what might have been blood. Mine or someone else's, I couldn't tell. The locket still hung around my neck, but it felt different now. Lighter. Like a burden had been lifted rather than weight added. Movement caught my eye. A figure emerged from the tree line upstream, moving slowly, favoring his left side. Even from a distance, even battered and bloodied, I recognized him immediately. King Thane looked like he'd fought his way through all 9 hells and barely escaped. His left arm hung useless at his side, the shoulder clearly dislocated. Deep claw marks ran across his chest, visible through the tatters of his tunic. His face was bruised, one eye swollen nearly shut, and he limped heavily on his right leg. But he was alive. He saw us and stopped, swaying slightly. For a long moment, we simply stared at each other across the distance. King and servant, father and... What? Not servant anymore. Not Omega in the old sense. Something new that didn't have a name yet. Then he began walking toward us, each step clearly costing him pain he refused to acknowledge. "You're alive," he said when he was close enough that he didn't have to shout. His voice was rough, scraped raw from battle and smoke. When the chamber exploded, when that light consumed everything, I thought. "We're alive," I confirmed, looking down at Kaela. "She's sleeping, but she's unharmed." King Thane lowered himself to the ground with a barely suppressed groan of pain, sitting cross-legged on the grass a few feet away. Close enough to talk, far enough to maintain some semblance of royal dignity despite looking like he'd been trampled by his own cavalry. "What happened?" he asked. "One moment I was fighting Silric in the tower. He'd summoned these shadow creatures, things that didn't die when you killed them, and then there was this sound, like the world itself was screaming. Or singing. I couldn't tell which. Everything went white, and when I could see again..." He gestured vaguely at the damaged palace. "This." "Kaela spoke," I said simply. "She spoke the word that the prophecy required, and it changed things." "Changed?" He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "That's certainly one way to describe it. Half my palace is rubble. The council members who survived are demanding explanations I don't have. And there's something else." He met my eyes directly. "The wolves. All of them. Something's different." "What do you mean?" "The hierarchies." He struggled to find words. "The instincts that have governed our kind since the first shifting, the automatic deference betas show to alphas, the way omegas can't help but submit to higher ranks, it's muted. Not gone but weaker. Like someone turned down the volume on a song that's been playing our entire lives." I felt it too now that he mentioned it. That constant low-level anxiety I'd carried my entire life, the hyper-awareness of my place in the hierarchy, the automatic impulse to lower my eyes and hunch my shoulders around those of higher rank, it was still there but distant. Like a habit I could choose to break rather than a law written into my bones. "The balance," I whispered. "The prophecy said when the child spoke, the old wounds would close. Maybe this is part of that healing. The forced hierarchy wasn't natural. It was a corruption that happened when the bloodlines split. When Sun Kings claimed dominance and drove the Moon Dynasty into shadow." King Thane was quiet for a long moment, processing this. Then, slowly, deliberately, he shifted forward onto his knees. His good hand pressed against the grass, and he bowed his head. "Your Majesty," I said, confused and alarmed. "What are you?" "You're not just an Omega," he interrupted, his voice formal despite the informal setting. "You're the last of the House of Loon. You're Vanya's niece, her sister's daughter. Which makes you royal blood. Which makes you..." He took a shaky breath. "Which makes you family. My family. Kaela's family. And I failed to protect you. Failed to even recognize you until it was almost too late. You didn't know. I should have." The words came out harsh, self-condemning. "Vanya told me to search for her sister. Made me promise. And I was so focused on maintaining order, on preventing chaos, that I let that promise slide. Let it become something I'd get to eventually. And all the while you were here. Under my own roof. Serving my household. Invisible." He raised his head, and I was shocked to see tears cutting tracks through the dirt and blood on his face. "I'm sorry, Liora. I'm so deeply, profoundly sorry." The apology broke something in my chest, a wall I'd built without realizing it, a barrier between what I'd been and what I was becoming. Tears spilled down my own cheeks, and I found myself reaching out, placing my hand on his shoulder. "You couldn't have known," I said. "My mother hid us too well. That was the point, to stay hidden, to survive. And we did. We survived long enough for this moment. For the prophecy to unfold the way it needed to. Still." He straightened slightly, though he remained on his knees. "I want you to know, I recognize you now. See you. And I'm asking, not as your king but as Vanya's widower, as Kaela's father, as your—" He struggled with the word. "As your family, will you help me? Help us. The kingdom is fractured. The old ways are breaking. I don't know how to rebuild from this without guidance from someone who carries the moon's wisdom." Before I could answer, Kaela stirred. Her eyes fluttered open, still carrying that faint luminescence, though it was gentler now. Softer. She looked at her father, then at me, and a small smile curved her lips. "Mommy," she said clearly. Then, turning to King Thane. "Papa." The king's breath caught. "Kaela, you're speaking. You're really speaking." "I was waiting," she said, sitting up in my lap with the grave seriousness only a 5-year-old could manage. "Had to wait for all the pieces. Had to wait for the moon to find us. But now," she looked around at the damaged palace, the wounded kingdom, the world teetering on the edge of transformation. "Now I can help." She reached out one small hand toward her father. King Thane took it gently, and she did the same with me, joining our hands together. The moment our skin touched, I felt it, a pulse of energy, warm and clean, spreading outward from where we sat. It rippled across the grass, turning brown patches green. It touched the river, and the water seemed to run clearer. It spread toward the palace, and I watched in awe as some of the smaller cracks in the walls began to seal themselves, stone knitting back together. But more importantly, it touched the wolves who were emerging from the palace ruins. Wounded soldiers limping toward the river. Servants helping each other away from collapsed sections. Even nobles who'd barricaded themselves in their chambers, now venturing out to assess the damage. Every wolf that energy touched seemed to stand a little straighter. Wounds that had been bleeding stopped. Burns that had been blistering began to heal. And on every face, I saw the same expression. Confusion giving way to wonder, giving way to hope. "What is she doing?" King Thane whispered. "Healing," I said. "Not just bodies. The divisions. The old wounds. She's showing everyone what we did in the chamber. That sun and moon together are stronger than either alone." Kaela's voice rose, clear and musical. Not quite singing, not quite speaking, but something in between. And though she used the old tongue, words I shouldn't understand, their meaning was crystalline. Let the strong protect with compassion. Let the gentle lead with courage. Let no voice be silenced. Let no rank diminish worth. Let the balance be restored. The wolves began to gather, drawn by her voice. They approached slowly, cautiously, but without the rigid hierarchy that would have normally governed such a gathering. Alphas didn't automatically take the front positions. Omegas didn't automatically hide in the back. They simply came together. When Kaela finished speaking, she looked up at her father with ancient eyes in a child's face. "The old way is broken, Papa. Can't fix it. Have to make something new." King Thane swallowed hard. Then, still on his knees before us, he raised his voice so the assembled wolves could hear. "My people," he began, and I heard the tremor in his words. Not weakness but emotion too large to contain. "Last night, our kingdom faced forces we didn't understand. We nearly fell to corruption and chaos. We survived only because of the courage of 2 souls I'd overlooked. A servant I'd failed to recognize, and a daughter whose silence I'd mourned instead of understood." He gestured to me, then to Kaela. "This is Liora of the House of Loon, last daughter of the Moon Dynasty. She is my wife's niece. She is royal blood. She is family." The declaration sent shocked whispers through the crowd. "And this," he placed his hand gently on Kaela's head, "is my daughter who carries both bloodlines within her. Sun and moon united." The crowd murmured, uncertain how to respond to this revelation. The prophecy has been fulfilled, King Thane continued. The silent child has spoken, and in speaking, she's shown us a truth we've denied for too long. The divisions between us, Alpha and Beta and Omega, Sun Dynasty and Moon, these weren't natural. They were wounds we allowed to fester into scars. They were walls we built to protect ourselves from each other, and in doing so we weakened us all. He struggled to his feet, swaying only slightly. His voice strengthened as he spoke. I cannot rebuild this kingdom on the old foundations. They were cracked from the beginning. So I swear to you now, by the blood of both dynasties running through my child's veins, we will forge something new. A kingdom where strength serves compassion. Where rank opens doors instead of closing them. Where every voice, no matter how quiet, has the right to be heard. Silence met his words. Then, from somewhere in the crowd, a single wolf began to howl. Not in challenge or aggression, but in acknowledgement. In agreement. Others joined. Until the morning air rang with the sound of wolves calling to each other without the rigid structures that had governed such calls for generations. Kaela pressed closer to me, and I wrapped my arms around her, holding her tight. King Thane extended his good hand to help me to my feet, and I took it, rising with his daughter in my arms. We stood together, the broken king, the revealed bloodline, and the child who bridged them both. Behind us, the sun was rising, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. And ahead of us, barely visible in the morning light, the moon hung pale and translucent on the horizon. Sun and moon sharing the sky. Both visible. Both honored. The silence has ended, I whispered, speaking to Kaela, to King Thane, to the assembled wolves, to the spirits of my mother and Queen Vanya who I could feel watching from somewhere beyond. And in its place. Balance, Kaela finished, her child's voice carrying the weight of prophecy fulfilled. In its place, balance. Sun and moon. Strong and gentle. Voice and listening. Together. Finally together. The wolves continued their howling, and gradually it shifted, harmonized, became something I'd never heard before. A song that wove together the aggressive power of alpha calls and the gentler melodies of omega voices and the steady rhythm of beta strength. All of it together. Unified. King Thane looked at me, and in his eyes I saw not a king commanding a subject, but a man asking a question of an equal. Can this really work? Can we actually rebuild from ashes and blood and broken hierarchies? I looked at the gathered wolves, at the damaged but standing palace, at the child in my arms who had spoken the words that changed everything. And I felt the presence of the moon queens who'd come before me, the wisdom they'd preserved through genocide and silence and the slow erosion of memory. Yes, I said softly. It can work. It will work. Because balance isn't something you impose. It's something you nurture. And we have the seeds of it right here. Kaela touched my cheek with one small hand, then reached out to touch her father's face with the other, connecting us, binding us, making visible the invisible threads that had always existed but had been denied for too long. Home, she said simply. This is home. Not the palace. Not the throne. This. She gestured at all of us, at the wolves singing their new harmonized song, at the sun and moon sharing the sky. This is home. And she was right. The kingdom of Aldenreach would remember that dawn not for the battle that preceded it or the rubble that remained, but for the moment when a mute princess spoke, when a hidden bloodline was revealed, when a hierarchy forged in fear finally cracked and let something gentler, stronger, and infinitely more resilient grow through. Songs would be written, yes. Stories told. But the true legacy wouldn't be in words or melodies. It would be in the world that slowly rebuilt itself around new foundations. In the Omegas who found their voices and the Alphas who learned to listen. In the children born to a kingdom where rank was earned through character rather than inherited through blood. In the quiet revolution that happened when power chose compassion, when strength chose service, when the sun finally acknowledged the moon as its equal. I looked up at that pale moon, still visible as the sun claimed the sky, and I thought of my mother, of Queen Vanya, of all the moon queens who'd preserved their wisdom through darkness, waiting for the moment when it could bloom again. Thank you, I whispered to them. Thank you for surviving, for hiding, for keeping the light alive even when it seemed easier to let it die. Kaela nestled closer, her voice drowsy but content. They hear you, Mommy. They're proud. And in that whisper, Mommy, I heard everything the prophecy had promised. The moon answering the sun. The lost bloodline rising from shadow. The silent child speaking truth that had been suppressed for too long. The world had broken. And in breaking it had finally learned how to heal. For in that whisper, Mommy, the moon answered the sun and the silence of history finally broke. What rose in its place was not dominance or submission, not sun eclipsing moon or moon overshadowing sun, but balance. True balance. The kind that honored both light and shadow, both strength and gentleness, both the roar that commands and the whisper that changes everything. The kingdom of Aldenreach would never be the same. But then it was never meant to stay the same. It was meant to grow, to heal, to remember that the most powerful magic isn't control or domination, but the courage to speak when silence seems safer, to rise when staying hidden seems easier, and to choose connection over isolation. The Alpha King's daughter who couldn't speak had spoken. And in speaking, she'd given voice to everyone who'd been silenced before her. The dawn had come. And with it, finally, the world could breathe.